You're listening to the Youth for Life podcast with Michelle Baum, Director of Y4Life at Lutherans for Life, where we prepare youth to be gospel-motivated voices for life. Be sure to stick around after today's live recording of our Chats for Life program to find out how you can be live too on our next Youth for Life podcast. Hello and welcome to a mailbag edition of our Youth for Life podcast. I'm Michelle, Director of Y4Life. With me, I have three guests, all who work for Y4Life, one at least, just for this summer. Macy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Macy. I'm the Y4Life summer intern, and I'm really excited to be on to talk about family.
And we've got two other guests, Diana and Corey. You want to introduce yourself or say hi?
Hi, I'm Diana. I am the Media Resource Assistant.
And I'm Corey. I am the Y4Life assistant.
So glad these ladies are with me today. We are going to be talking about our mailbag topic for today is marriage and family in particular. And we've got a number of questions that students have given us on marriage and family that youth have given us. And so we want to start off today. And I think, Diana, if you want to start us off with one of your questions, and we want to hit the ground running on these topics. Really important one. Where actually so many questions have come in that we're going to divide up our topics into two different recordings. This one specifically on family, and our other one on what it means, for the couple to be married.
Okay, so the first question I highlighted was, how has our incredibly sexualized culture affected marriage and families today? And how can spouses and families combat that culture?
It is a great question. Definitely, our culture is sexualized, right? Has over-sexualized the relationships between men and women, and obviously men and women and women. So I think we don't have to argue whether or not our culture has been sexualized, but it has definitely affected marriage and family. It has affected marriage in particular in what happens in the bedroom, right? But then also it's affected children, and you see this over sexualization of children with their even the clothes that might be an option for putting our child in or dressing our child in. So I think to like focus on the couple, one of the things that my husband has seen, right, as a pastor, is this idea when he does premarital counseling, that sex is supposed to just be fantastic and incredibly romantic and spur of the moment, and yet also perfect. So our over-sexualized culture has this false sense of what sex is supposed to be. And we see this in the movies and we see this in the books. And so one of the things that he does during premarital counseling is he actually tries to give them a maybe a good starting point, right? So when two people come together for the first time, probably everything is not going to be super perfect and like the movies. Maybe it'll work up to that over the years, but if it's the first time you've had sex, you should anticipate that it's not going to be like the movies. And one of the beauties of two people becoming one is the fact that you're becoming one together. You're exploring, you're experiencing things for the first time together, and so it whenever you do something for the first time, you probably don't do it perfectly, and maybe even you make mistakes or you laugh a little bit or it's not like the movies, right? Where everything is just gonna go perfectly. So I guess that's maybe where I want to start with this. Where would you guys like to go?
I saw a post the other day that talked about how the sexual revolution, particularly in the 60s, is kind of what led us to the point where we are in culture today. Because we wanted to be so free with our sexuality, we have kind of swung the pendulum too far. But we're starting to see some of that swing back, especially in some of the Supreme Court cases that have just been decided, or other things that are coming out in Congress and in the Senate right now, in a federal level, with the defunding of Planned Parenthood in certain states, things like that. So, um, combating the incredibly sexualized culture, we see a lot of couples getting married young and having children young, and either homeschooling or sending to parochial schools instead of going straight for a public school option, making shifts as a family to prioritize those things that are important. So, and a lot of the to use the popular term trad wife traditions are coming back to, where, mom is home to be a good role model for the kids. Even, maybe mom is working from home, but she's also caring for house and home. So just a lot of those things that I think young Christians, particularly young Christian men, are a driving force behind it, of wanting to get married young and have big families. And I think that's a positive shift after we've seen the pendulum swing really, really far um, towards the sexual liberation side of things. So small steps forward, but small steps forward are what it's going to take to get the pendulum swung back a little bit the other way. So,
Yeah, Corey, I think you're exactly right. And especially with the sexual revolu living post-sexual revolution, is really affecting our families because children learn from a young age, whether it's their friends at school or just pop culture or whatever, that sex is something personal, that it's, something that allows you to explore and have your own personal pleasure rather than something that's, reserved for a man and a wife to share and delight with each other. Um, and I think that's also really difficult for families because it also teaches kids from a young age that they don't have to necessarily like listen to their parents, I guess, because they can go off and explore and do things that their parents probably wouldn't condone. But you're also right, Corey. It's very encouraging how our culture is kind of shifting backwards. So hopefully that keeps happening.
I kind of look at this from like a different perspective, being like in the age bracket there was a very big purity ring, like very. So I feel kind of protective of like my daughter and what she sees and what she hears and what we read, because you never know what will get put in your library bag. Um, but also I think it's just surrounding yourself with solid Christian materials and making sure that, like, from an early age, they know that God created boys, God created girls. They know safe touch. They know, I should keep my body covered because my body is a gift from God. I think I look at it that way more than anything else.
Yeah, and as I mentioned at the beginning, where, culture has taught us that sex is supposed to be a certain way, really, that one of the ways to avoid that is to be very protective of what you see and what films you watch and what shows you watch, right? Even though they seem innocent, shows that glorify hookups, right? Or glorify sex outside of marriage, or even show sex between married couples. Maybe we shouldn't watch that, right? I know my that sets up our expectations. Like, my husband as a pastor, he said, I've just seen so many broken marriages, and their expectations are broken because their expectations are what they've seen on film or what they've read in a book. And the truth is, that's it's not like the movies, right? So if we go into a marriage relationship with the idea that this is what we're looking for, and then we don't achieve that perfection that the world tells us is perfection, right? When things don't happen as we're told they should, then there's sometimes issues in a marriage, issues with individual expectations, and those sorts of things. So yeah, protecting your own self, protecting yourself, your eyes, your ears, your understanding of sex, right? And really the best place to learn about it, right? If you want answers, if you want questions, Christian materials and again, Christian parents to be able to tell you what that is supposed to look like, right?
Yeah, and one last thing, just as you were talking, Michelle, I was reminded too of, our kids sometimes will pick up a book or see something at a friend's house that, that again, it glorifies sex in a way that is not the way it is. Um, and so just also as Christian parents being open to answer the questions and not being ashamed of it, like, oh no, like how dare you look at that, but instead saying, well, let's talk about it and why this is something we don't engage in watching or reading. Because I think that also will help shift the culture. Not that we should be so open and like talking about it just brazenly, but saying, hey, if you have questions, I would like to be the one to answer that for you. I don't want you to feel like shame for having maybe accidentally seen something or picking up a book at the library that, all your friends are reading and then you don't realize what the content is. Um, and being open to having those conversations as the parent in that situation, I think can also help shift things culturally for our kids.
Yeah, and absolutely age appropriateness, right? And
Mhm.
and you alluded
Mhm.
to that. One of the presentations I give talks about what types of um, life issues are appropriate to talk about at different ages, and it's good to be first on the scene to talk about life issues and sexuality and intimacy between two people who love each other. That discussion belongs in the family. But of course the world is going to attempt to have that discussion. And so, yeah, it is best to address it and to be open about it, to make sure that you indicate to your kids, hey, you can ask me any question, and I'll let you know. Uh, I'll be happy to answer it. And there are age appropriate answers. And sometimes that age appropriate answer is, you know what, not yet. Because if I talk to you about this now, it's going to harm you for the future, or it's going to be too much to bear, too much to carry, right? So I'm gonna have that discussion with you, and we're gonna talk about it. Or, this is as much as I want to share right now. So when parents answer the question, they don't have to answer it uh, in the same way with every age group, right? So, all right, who has the next question?
I'll jump in with the next question. So this one comes from someone who says, I have a friend who grew up in a broken household and had divorced parents. She was talking to another one of my friends and said that she did not want to get married. Do you think this might be because of the divorced parents? What do you think of this? And how can I approach this topic with her in a Christian way?
Yeah, that's a really hard situation. And unfortunately, it's really common. I know I've had a couple friends who have this exact scenario, and it makes sense because our parents are our first teachers. We learn how to walk from them, we learn how to talk from them, how to eat from them. And so we also learn what love is from them as well. And so if we see that love is broken in our parents, then we're gonna think that's all that love is. That's all that marriage is brokenness. Um, but obviously that's not, I mean, not obviously, but it is true to that person, but we do know that in God we find an example of perfect love, and he can heal us and help us to have a good and healthy relationship. Um, so yeah.
There were, I spent some time teaching before joining Lutherans for Life, and certainly I heard this at the high school level. I heard this from students who were afraid of the future and afraid that they didn't see, that they weren't sure if their marriage would last. And we have seen, if you look at marriage rates, there has been a decrease in marriage and an increase in cohabitation. In other words, living together without being married, right? When a couple lives together. So I think those fears are evident if you look statistically at marriage rates, and I think those fears are valid when that has been your role model. Um, and so I would encourage her, first of all, with the hope and the promise that God is with a couple during marriage, um, and that not every marriage ends in divorce. In fact, in recent years, whereas over 50% of marriages were ending in divorce. That has dropped below the 50 percentile. It's just barely below, but it is still trending in the right way. And I think what I would encourage her to do is, Macy, you mentioned God is the perfect example of love, but to really explore what real love looks like, and then also to seek out couples who have been married for a long time and use them as models. Ask them questions, whether those are grandparents or aunts or uncles or your friends' parents. Like ask questions. What is it that makes their marriage last? Um, Talk to Christian couples who have been together for a long time and have a healthy marriage, and work to model, um, you know, the future. Whether she may not get married or this friend may not get married, um, but I would say don't be afraid of being married because of the possibility of divorce. Instead, prepare for a lifelong marriage. Start gathering those facts and finding those models. And it's really good too with new couples to have a mentor model that they meet with or that they um, talk to when um, when they run into questions or concerns or things happen in their marriage. It's good to have mentor models.
I I think I would come to this from the approach of like asking why. Like, do they think that being independent and on their own would be more fulfilling? Or is it like a cohabitation situation? Or is it a protecting your heart from getting hurt situation? I feel like it's easy to look at this and being like, oh, she has divorced parents and she said she doesn't want to get married. But it could just be like, I think maybe I just would rather be by myself. Or maybe I'm just really scared of getting hurt. Um, but if it is the cohabitation one, I would encourage you to check out our infographic on that because there's a lot of really interesting stats on there, especially with how Christians view cohabitation and the damaging effects it can have on marriage and the future of relationships and your pocketbook and lots of other things.
Yeah, and I will say I was someone who had a friend who didn't think she was ever going to get married, and I think a big part of that was is she knew a lot of divorce. Her parents got divorced. Both of her older siblings had gotten divorced, so she was just feeling like, well, I don't think I'm ever going to get married, and I don't think I'm ever just gonna want to be, in a long-term relationship with someone. And I think that started to change when she first, when she saw friends of hers getting married and having successful marriages, and finding the right person to work through some of those issues with. And then two, finding a man who genuinely loved her for who she was and not just for certain aspects about her, who's there to support her fully. And I think that can change things as well, is seeing good examples of marriage and then also finding someone who is willing to walk through the hard with you and not just, be there to be someone that you go on dates with and then, is like, okay, well, but now you're in a hard situation and I'm not willing to walk through that with you. So, and then I think a big thing too is approaching in a Christian way is a question that was asked here as well. And I think praying for your friend who may be having those feelings, asking the Lord to give her direction and guidance. We do know that not everyone is going to get married. In fact, the Apostle Paul says that not everyone will be married, and that's okay. And so, praying that just the Lord would guide her and lead her to um, the right vocation for her, whether that is wife or whether that is as a single woman in the future.
Yeah. So the next question, kind of talking about vocations within the family. Um, this person asked, how has the word submit, as in the wife must submit to her husband, become twisted in today's culture?
I think that teams up really good with the question that says, what about the wife staying at home with the kids? I feel like we talked about changes in roles of how a lot more women are staying home and everything. But I think I really I struggled with the whole submission thing at when I was an undergrad at Concordia because I had never met a man who, you're told submit to your husband as he submits to the church, right? Like I never met a man that made me understand that until I met my husband. I just thought it was very like, oh, well, you need to listen to me and I'm right, you're wrong. And 22-year-old Diana, 21-year-old Diana did not like that. And it wasn't until meeting my husband that I understood like when someone genuinely loves you and wants what's best for you, it's easy to submit to that because they're not going to hurt you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
today's culture certainly has twisted the term submit um, in some ways, and yet God's word also hasn't changed, right? The wife is called to submit to her husband, um, and that certainly doesn't mean that a wife doesn't have opinions or a wife doesn't have personality or that a woman can't lead in areas or make decisions or those sorts of things. But submission really is an order of headship and a matter of respect, and a recognition that God has gifted this husband to you, to be the umbrella of care over you, right? So when I talk about this with youth, I often talk about how the husband is to be that umbrella of care over his wife and family. And a husband who is doing what God has called him to do is going to be the servant, like the um, best servant, right, in the household. He is supposed to reflect Christ just as the wife reflects the church. So the relationship between the church and Christ. And Christ sacrifices his life for the benefit of the church. He is so um, servant oriented. He loves so wholeheartedly that he loves enough to die for her. And that is what a husband is called to do, is called to care for and to serve and uphold the lives of the people that God has placed under his umbrella, whether that be wife and children or just wife until children arrive. Um, and so Diana is right. When you have a husband who recognizes his role and attempts to carry that role out, to do what is best for his wife and his children, um, then submitting to him becomes much easier. Uh, I used to tell my high school students in the classroom, ladies, don't marry someone you don't respect. Don't marry someone that you are unable to submit to. And so what type of man will you be able to submit to, right? Uh, Certainly, hopefully, he will be a faithful leader. He will be kind and compassionate. He will be um, there are many, we're looking for many different qualities. Everyone looks for different qualities, but really what we're looking for is someone who will be Christ in our family, who will do the things necessary to serve and uphold those lives so that a woman, if she wants to stay home with her kids, can do so, right? Or so that a woman can fulfill her role of childbearing in a safe environment and in one that that provides for her. There's, so she can do the vocation she has been called to do.
Yeah, I was just thinking too, as you were talking about headship, Michelle, Pastor Jonathan and Krista Petzold wrote the book Male and Female, and they talk about headship and helpership and how, as your marriage is reflective of Christ and the church, Christ is the head and the church is the helper. So as your marriage reflects that, your husband is the head and the wife is the helper. And so remembering too, again, what Michelle said, that, Christ laid down his life in the ultimate act of servanthood. Husbands are called to do the same for their families and sacrifice. And so that's one thing too that I just have to keep reminding myself is it's a role of head and helper. And as a wife, I am there to help. And sometimes that means, submitting to what my husband has asked or being there to support him through decisions. That doesn't mean you are just a doormat that he walks all over. That is not sacrificial love. That is not a reflection of Christ in the church. But it is one that if your husband says, I don't like these things, these qualities that are coming out, that I see you're giving more time to your friends or your work, and you are forgoing care for the family and care for, you should listen to that because he sees that, he wants to bring you back in to be that support for your primary vocations of, wife and of mother or things of that nature. Um, and two, as in the role of helper, the wife submits to the husband, but that also means that when your husband is starting to stray, you can help lead him back um, into that servanthood leadership.
I think the definition of headship is important to know because you're right, Corey. It isn't we get to do everything my way, and I'm going to take advantage of you, and everyone else gets to serve me, right? Like that's not headship. Headship is not as much being in charge as recognizing that you have people in your charge.
Mm.
These are the people that God has given to you to take care of, right? That's what headship is. Headship is recognizing that you have a responsibility to love and care for the people that God has placed under your care. And that often means putting your own needs to the side and caring for the needs of those God has placed in your family.
It makes me think of servant leadership, right?
Yeah.
Like that might be a term like you're talking about in school and stuff if you're in business or church work, like servant leadership. And that's what makes me think of submitting to your husband because they're serving. They're like you said, they're not a king sitting on a throne being like, where's my dinner? And like pounding on the table or, like they're doing the dishes alongside you and you are each other's helper because you love each other, but you also trust each other and serve each other.
Okay, I know we also asked the question about the role of women and whether or not she should stay home with children. Uh, who wants to jump in on that?
I will. So, like, the early childhood nerd in me is like super into the first 3 years. The first 3 years of a child's life is when their brain develops the most, especially in the first year. With that being said, sometimes having a stay-at-home mom is an amazing gift, but also if the mom is not called, like they do not feel called to be a stay-at-home mom, it can do more hindrance on their mental health and the child's development than having a mom being forced to stay home. So I honestly think that it's a conversation you need to have with your spouse because children sense the mood around them and you want a happy family, right? Like you don't want to ever be disgruntled because you're staying at home with your child. So I think it's an honest conversation to have as husband and wife for your family, but also like have a backup plan in case it's not how you picture it from Instagram and everything else.
Yeah, I want to tag on that because I've had a little bit of experience being a stay-at-home mom a little bit. When my son was born, um, there was just no way that we were going to afford childcare if I kept working. My whole paycheck would have gone to childcare, and that just seemed silly when I could stay home with him. So, I stayed with home with him until he was just over 1. And I really enjoyed that time, but it is a very different thing staying home with an infant versus having toddlers running around the house. There are very different developmental things that go on, like Diana said, in those first 3 years. And so um, I think also having the conversation and reevaluating as your child grows up and finding what is best for both, mom and dad and child. Um, you know, it may be better for some part-time care during the week too. So mom has time to tidy things around the house that maybe she wouldn't be able to with a kiddo at home. It's really easy to get some stuff clean when you have a newborn who is, either on you, like in a baby carrier all day, or is in a crib napping. Newborns sleep a lot. But when you have a 3-year-old running around the house, it's very different because that 3-year-old really wants to play and learn and interact with mom and dad at home. So even if you're a stay-at-home mom, finding, 2 or 3 hours a week where your child can go have a structured play date outside the home with um, a trusted childcare worker or a nanny versus, having that child in the home, and then maybe it makes it harder for you to care for the home. Those are things to consider as well if you are feeling called to stay home with your children. Um, working from home, I always thought that maybe I would keep my kids home with me, and I realized I am not terribly productive when my kids are home because they very much want mom to play with them. So, what works best for all of us is they go to a Lutheran daycare center where they learn about Jesus. They get some education, like Diana was talking about with the early childhood education. They're little sponges, they soak everything up, and then I'm able to work. But I also do very much enjoy the time home with them when they are home in the evenings, on the weekends, afternoons, even days off from daycare. We try to make it something very fun for them so they feel like they're getting all of mom and dad's attention at home or all of mom's attention at home. So, from a layperson standpoint, that's where I kind of see the benefits of both. But again, like Diana said, it's a conversation you have to have with your spouse, especially, maybe thinking about those things before you have children and then reevaluating after you have children, because the ideals may change when you have another human in the house.
Yeah, and I think also remembering that whether or not you work or stay at home, both for the husband and for the wife, your first priority is as mother or father, and that vocation comes before your job. Like it's okay to work. It's okay to have a job. My mom stayed at home my entire life, and that worked for her, but that is not going to work for every woman or every husband. I know there's stay-at-home dads nowadays, and maybe that's a different conversation. But no matter what, your first vocation is to the home and taking care of your children and teaching them about Jesus. So,
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do think, Macy, you're right. As someone who now I'm on the other side, I have my two kids are raised, right? And I think we approach this question with grace. And I love how all three of you have started there. We approach this question with the acknowledgement that motherhood is a gift and children are always gifts. right? And motherhood is an incredibly important vocation. Um, right there next to being a wife, and those vocations are incredibly important. And so um, it does take time to think to understand how best you can serve as a mom. Sometimes it does mean getting some time outside the home and working outside the home, and sometimes it means um, being at home 100% of the time. And every woman every woman is different, but every woman who has been gifted the vocation of motherhood has been called to be a mother, right? And but mothers look different. They look different. They have different skills. They have different sets. And the really wonderful thing is, God's not going to give you that vocation unless unless He's also going to provide for you and equip you for that vocation. Um, I think the important thing is, we remember that every vocation is in service to others. So, our vocation as mother is in service to our children. How can we best serve them? Sometimes that means we do a really hard thing and we give up our job and we stay at home full time. And or maybe that's not a really hard thing, right? And sometimes because of mental health or because of needs of the family, we still work. We work outside the home, but it is important in each of those cases to uphold that vocation, and to do what's necessary to serve your children and your family. And I think you ladies, you did a fantastic job of showing the different sides of that, right?
Can I just add one more thing onto that?
Yeah.
I was um I was reading something and it talked about how in for stay-at-home moms, sometimes they feel like they're not doing enough. But like when you're changing those diapers, when you are picking up Play-Doh off the ground and cleaning up messes, you are still serving the Lord. Like they're gifts from God, right?
Mhm.
So when you are in the mundane of motherhood, which can be kind of exhausting, just remember you are still serving the best gift God, one of the best gifts on earth that God could ever give you, and that's
Yep.
your children.
Yeah, absolutely. It is good work. It is life affirming work to parent. It is one of the greatest tasks that and vocations that God gives, motherhood and fatherhood, and it is very rewarding. But like every vocation, you're right, Diana, there's a crucible of sorts, right? Every vocation shapes and forms us. Every vocation refines us. And refining work is hard work. It's not easy work, but it is work worth doing. It is very rewarding work. Um, like I've heard people older than me say, and I remember this when I was raising my kids, your job doesn't love you back, right? But your kids, they will. And in the end, when you look back at your life, you won't regret the time you spent with your kids, right? You just won't. So so yeah, it's speaking about that, speaking of children, then let's answer this question. Is it selfish to not want kids? Is it selfish to not want kids?
The first thing I go to whenever someone asks a question like this is the command we're given in Genesis of be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. And so in that command, God isn't saying like you have to have, 18 kids, but he is saying, you know, you are here to care for the earth, and you're not going to be able to care for it if it's just the two of you, to Adam and Eve, right? Like fill the earth and subdue it doesn't mean conquering and being at war with everybody, but it does mean caring for what God has given them, being good stewards of the earth God has given them. And so I look at that as there is some selfishness to not wanting kids. There is a different conversation to be had if it is a situation of infertility and you cannot have kids. But not wanting kids, I think if you are married to a good Christian spouse and you are both in agreement that kids are a blessing, it can be selfish to not want kids. Um, and I think that that's something to remember is you have to think about the motivation behind it. Is it a situation thing or is it a just a desire thing?
Yeah, the command is to be, it indicates that as a married person, you should be open to the gift that God desires to give. God desires to give kids. And so, so yes, if you do not want kids because you really, you're really excited about a double income and lots of opportunities to go on vacations and not having the responsibility or as some would call it, the hassle of children, then yes, that is selfish. And we are by nature selfish people, right? Right? It is okay to admit that um, that w we struggle with those things, right? Every human being does. But when you are married, you should be ready to receive that gift. And if you're not ready to receive that gift, then you probably shouldn't be getting married, because that is part of what God desires to give. Now, there are exceptions, right? There are times that maybe people will choose to prevent that gift with because of a severe disability or whether that is physical or mental depression. Those they might prevent it for a time, or they may say, you know what, I don't think we would be able to. I would be able to carry full term, right? And so instead, we're going to adopt. There are some times when extenuating circumstances might cause one to say maybe this isn't a gift that we can have. But ultimately, it is God's choice whether to give that gift or not, right? And certainly, um, valuing children, wanting children is really an important aspect or important qualification to look for in a spouse. Um, God does some, again, refining work, and it is only through having children that we really better understand the love that God has for us. That unconditional love, that self-sacrificial love. We can sometimes learn that from a spouse, but our spouse doesn't usually, when we marry them, need us to feed them or wipe their bottom or carry them around the house or wake up with them every 2 hours. Like there's a lot of things that are needed for kids. That it's a different type of love. It's a different type of love than the romantic love that you have with your spouse. And maybe someday you will need to feed your spouse and wipe your spouse's bottom and stay up with them during the night. I mean, there that could come. But children require a different type of care, and it is a self-sacrificial, unconditional love that we get to learn when we have children. And it's a wonderful gift when God gives it to us.
I think I would also ask why don't you? Like, is there bad relationships with your parents where you're afraid you may not be able to be a good parent, or is it just a fear? Like, and in those situations, I would say perhaps it's something that you should reach out to your pastor and talk to them about, or your counselor and with your spouse and figure it out. Because I think if you evaluate, like Michelle said, is it because you want to go to like Tahiti and sunbathe during the summer or winter, preferably, probably, right? Or is it because you're genuinely scared you're not going to be a good parent? Because God is with you, like Michelle said, in that vocation, and He will give you the skills to bring joy and love to your house.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention the vocation of singleness as well. Um, because if you are called to singleness, it's not selfish that you don't have kids. And I know that's a little different because that's not necessarily a want there. Like you're not saying, "Oh, I don't want kids, so I'm going to be single." But if you are called to singleness, you're fulfilling a wonderful vocation that God has set before you, and it's not selfish that you don't have kids. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So just looking at, when to have kids. We've got a couple of questions on here about that, when to have kids, when should you have children? Um, I'm just going to jump in on that one real quick because, again, once you're married, you should be open to that possibility and open to that gift. So usually people get married in their 20s, right? And that's a pretty good time to have kids. Certainly women are more fertile in their 20s than they are in their 30s. In fact, if you have a baby in your 30s, it's called a geriatric pregnancy.
No,
Um,
no, they've changed it. It is
oh.
advanced maternal age now.
That's great.
I just wanna,
That's
if
great.
you are listening in your 30s, it's not geriatric, it's advanced maternal age.
That would have been very nice 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Geriatric. It's got a different tone, right? Words matter. But you are at more high risk in your 30s, and your baby is at higher risk of having some abnormalities or some genetic abnormalities, right? Or not being able to carry the child full term. So, clearly the body is made, a woman's body is made to carry babies for a while. 20s certainly are easier to carry babies than 30s and 40s and 50s. And eventually, a woman's body no longer is able to carry babies. And so, when the babies come, that's always a gift, whether there's a disability or whether there's, a difference or whether there's a medical need. But we also know the body is probably better able to carry when the woman is young. What about we've talked a little bit about women and being stay-at-home moms, that sort of thing. Let's talk about men. Let's talk about men as role head of the household, right? How do we how do we as Christians understand that? And how I think we addressed that a little bit earlier, but how can we honor that gift of a man's role in the household?
I think this question is sometimes uncomfortable because when people hear that the man is the head of the household, they think, oh, he's ruling over everyone and he's the boss. But I don't think that's not how God intends it at all. Because in a household, the man is a picture of Christ, who is a humble servant and gives his life to save and protect and uphold the lives of us. And so a man gives everything. Men actually have it harder. For the ladies on here, us women have it easy. We get to be under his care, but the man has to give everything he has for his wife and for his family. And that's a heavy burden. And I think also with headship, like we see this in the Old Testament when God is instructing families to teach his law, he always puts the charge on or the burden, the onus on the man, on the father. And so men have the responsibility as the head of the household to teach their family about God and about Christ and to, make sure that they're going to church and things like that. So really, I think headship is all just about responsibility and sacrifice.
I'd like to add on to that because Macy is completely 100% spot on with that, especially we kind of have it easier. And I think about like my husband who goes to work in like the 100-degree weather and the sub-zero weather and works really, really hard. So I can, for the most part, be home with my daughter. I work while she sleeps, right? So while I get to enjoy taking her to the park or, going to see her grandma or, going on these little adventures shopping. Like I get to enjoy that on a daily basis while he's working. But I also think that I find a lot of joy in caring for him then. Like I find a lot of joy in like little things like packing his lunch, which he's a grown man. he could easily pack his own lunch. But it's nice to know that when he sits down for lunch, like he's like, oh, they love me. Like my daughter helped make this bread, which made the kitchen a disaster. But like, but it's very much like finding joy and being thank being thankful for them and the sacrifices that they make.
Yeah, I wanted to add on too to Macy's what she was saying about the man taking the family to church and how that's his responsibility to be the leader in that role. Because there's some interesting statistics that say like if the mom is the one leading the family to church, then there's a 50% chance that the kids will stay in church as they grow up. But if it's the father taking the family to church, that bumps all the way up to like 75, 80% that the kids are going to stay in church. And I think that that can be translated into a lot of different things about what the man's role as head of house is. If you see dad working hard, you're going to want to work hard because he sets that example. If you see dad loving mom well, you are going to want to find a spouse that loves you well. So if you're the son, you're going to love your future wife well. If you are a daughter, you're going to want to find a man who is going to love you well, as your dad loved your mother well. And so I think that we often think that well mom is with the children most of the time so she's setting the example but really it's both mom and dad setting the example and dad's headship of the house is what sets the tone for the whole house. If dad comes home grouchy, everyone's grouchy. If dad comes home in a good mood, everyone's in a good mood. And I think that's something just to remember as as high schoolers and college students, if you're looking for a spouse, find someone that is going to be a good head of house. Or, if you're a woman, finding someone that will be in that role. Or if you're a man, like start thinking like, okay, how can I be a good head of house? What can I do to provide for a future family? Um, and the first thing is continuing to go to church and stay in the word because God will guide you. And then the next things are, carrying out your vocations as God has called you to carry them out.
Yeah, I don't want to like ruin the presentation that I'll be giving this summer at Higher Things, but at Higher Things I'll be talking all about this. So come to my presentation, but we're going to talk about real love and we're going to talk about the role of man and woman and what to look for in a spouse and all that good stuff. What, the good gift that marriage wants to give. But you're absolutely, Corey, when you mentioned the husband sets the tone of the house. I was listening to a podcast a number of months ago, and one of the speakers on there described it like this, and I thought it was so awesome. So I'm going to share it. He said that the man sets the rhythm. Like think of a song. Think of the melody of a song. The man sets that, right? The beat, the rhythm, establishes the melody because of his influence. But it's the women, it's the wife and children who create the descants and all of the nuances, right? It's the singing in parts, and that's what makes married life beautiful. It's what makes a family beautiful. Is that together they create this incredible song, right? This life affirming song, this orchestra of sorts. But he said, without a husband to in the way that God has formed him to kind of create or lay that foundation of guidance, which should be biblical, you have no rhythm, right? You have no melody. And we understand that in the world there are broken homes. We understand in the world that there are times when moms need to, moms are alone and they're raising kids and they're doing a fantastic job. They're doing the best they can. But that doesn't take away their work, right? But we also recognize that God didn't plan for a woman to have to raise kids alone, right? He wanted something more for her. And so this is just encouragement to young men, right? To men who are thinking about getting married, and your role is really important. And it is a loss. It is a loss when you walk away, or when in an unplanned pregnancy, you decide that you have no role. I mean, that is a huge loss, not only in the life of this young woman, but also in her child, in your child. And so yeah, I mean, there's so much out there, so many statistics on divorce and the effect of divorce on kids. But it starts even before then. It starts before children come, and there's the song that they create together. So it's a really just I think just a beautiful image, especially for those of us who attend church and we love the music of the church and the layers of that music, and how beautiful that can come to be. But speaking of divorce, we did have a question on that, right? And this is from a youth that just breaks my heart. But he or she asks, how do you handle the struggle of being the child of two people who have given up on loving each other, but won't get a divorce? So thoughts, I've been kind of, musing on that for a while. And just my heart hurts for this situation. What are your thoughts, ladies?
I think the hardest part of this is I don't know the situation of what this youth is seeing as they don't love each other anymore, right? Like, I think there's a lot of times where maybe we hear mom and dad bickering, and that may show the child that maybe mom and dad are angry at each other and they don't like each other in that moment. But it's hard to know what is meant by they don't like they've given up on loving each other. And I think the first advice that I would have for the youth is to pray, ask God to heal whatever wounds are there, to guide both parents to reconciliation and to work together. Because if they won't get a divorce, that does show at least that they want some stability for their child, but that maybe they are willing to eventually work through some of the differences to overcome the given up on whatever, in the marriage. So for this youth, just pray, that God may soften the hearts of both mom and dad, that they may come back together. Pray that if they need to seek Christian counseling, and it sounds like they probably do, that they may find a good pastor or a good Christian counselor to work through those things. And I think the other thing is just have a conversation as a family. Say, I've noticed that things aren't great. Can we talk about it? Can we pray together as a family? Can we spend time in the Bible as a family? Because that may be some of it too, is just it's hard, but if you as a family aren't spending time in the Word together, that may also cause some of those rifts to form and the cracks to deepen over time. So I would just say, prayer and time in the Word are my biggest advice that I can give for this youth who is unfortunately dealing with this, but also just as a support to the parents, because they clearly are in need of the prayer just as much. So
I want to hop in and say that in a world where everything seems to be so disposable and people are just ready to get rid of things, like, first of all, thank God that they are not getting divorced, right? Like, they are staying together, and in your marriage vows, you say for better and for worse. And sometimes you have those dips and valleys, but the fact that they're holding on to their unity in together in Christ means that he's still going to work in their relationship, right? Perhaps communication is off. Life can be hard at different stages. So I would say perhaps talk to them and say, hey, I'm just kind of noticing. I want to see, like, maybe we can all go talk to someone together, or we can, like, let them know that you see things going on, but also make a note for your future spouse. Like, when I'm stressed and I am anxious or this, do I shut down? Do I shut other people out? Because that is something common that can happen. And just make yourself aware of it also, so that down the road, you don't do the same thing to the person you love.
Yeah. And I also wanted to add, I had kind of a secondhand experience with this. My close friend when I was in middle school and my neighbor, she was my neighbor as well. Her parents were in this situation and she basically lived at my house because the fighting and everything was so bad. And I think my biggest takeaway from that situation is when you're a child with parents who have given up on loving each other or are fighting all the time, it's important to surround yourself as a child with people and families who love you, because God has put people in place to love you and to uphold your life and your mental health and everything, and to support you in really tough times. And I think it's also important to remember that God has not given up on loving you, and He's not given up on loving your parents. Even though their marriage is broken, because we live in a fallen world, He loves them, and he's like Diana said, He's working to uphold their marriage because He's united it in His name. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Macy. Someone who's in a situation where their parents are fighting, you're right. It's important to surround yourself with people who love you. That doesn't mean that you absent yourself from mom or dad, but it also means that you look for ways in which God has provided love in other areas, um, and models, right? Models for what a good marriage looks like. I know I've had friends and who have done that, who've maybe grown up in broken homes that were maybe parents are still together, but lots of fighting, very similar to you, Macy. And they looked for other couples that had healthy relationships and spent time, watching them, asking questions. I really loved both, Corey and Diana, your advice for prayer. I think that's definitely in order. Counseling is definitely in order. And even if your parents uh, don't want counseling, that's you're certainly welcome to pursue that. And it may be helpful to speak to someone, especially spiritual counseling, pastoral counseling, um, asking for guidance there, for comfort. If you can get the church involved or other family members that where it won't create more of a crisis, that's always good too. Because remember, marriage is not something that just a couple is supposed to uphold, but the whole community is supposed to uphold marriage. Like we as Christians should never come between a man and a woman, a wife and a husband. Instead, God's very clear that we are to uphold marriage rather than to cause more division. So, sometimes that can be done through friends and family members who are encouraging and providing support and saying, "This is important. Let me step into this situation and help you guys, if possible." Again, it depends on the situation. Sometimes that would make it worse. But continuing to pray for your parents, continuing to express your concern for the relationship, and then also getting the care that you need, the care and the support, would be a really great way to approach this. Any final questions that ladies that you want to address?
There's one that I just saw that I don't think we had talked about, but I think it is important to discuss in the context of vocations in the family.
Mhm.
This one says, "My older sisters don't believe in marriage and are cohabitating. How do I defend my belief of wife and mother?"
Cohabitation is like a slippery sin, right? Like, especially after doing so much research for our cohabitation infographic, because it's kind of like a not big sin. And I'm using air quotes. Sin is sin, right? But also a huge majority of Christians are now finding it acceptable to cohabitate. Um, I think personally, it's knowing the facts and just upholding what God has called you to do, right? And that's what He has called us all to do, not live together until you're married. and not have, hopefully, children until you're married. Um, because that's a gift, right? And it's like peeking at your gifts before Christmas. Like you're not going to be surprised then. Uh, that's my personal take. But also, I would share the information in our cohabitation infographic because people always have like ridiculous excuses like, oh, well, I wouldn't save money. Well, actually, you're not saving money. That's in there. Like, you're going to end up broke, especially if you cohabitate with more than one person. And you're increasing your risk of divorce by like double. Um, and you don't appreciate living together after marriage. Like the whole, like I said, peeking at the gift idea. Like you're not going to be excited about the new, I was going to say trampoline. That's probably not a gift you guys want. Your new PS, whatever, or your new iPhone. Like if you know that you're getting it already.
I think also, Diana, those are really great points. Like, I really like the analogy of peeking under, like peeking into the gift. I think also with cohabitation is you're setting yourself up for so much pain that you can't heal from. Because I've seen people who cohabitated for several years and then they broke up, which, is a divorce in a way because you've been living as a married couple, but you can't process that you're going through a divorce. And divorce is so painful because it's like, I had a pastor explain to me, it's like if you had two pieces of paper that were glued together and you ripped them apart. And so couples who are cohabitating for years and then they break up, they're experiencing that pain, but they can't express it because they've told themselves that they aren't, or, that it's different from being married. And it's really hard.
I'll add into, I think a lot of people who cohabitate instead of get married, um, their big argument is that, well, marriage is just a piece of paper. I don't need the law to tell me that I love this person. And I think that's a really sad way to view marriage because there are so many gifts that come with marriage that are often overlooked by those who choose to cohabitate. Like this one, especially from the view of a wife and a mother, the the big thing that I talked to my husband about before we even got engaged is I said I was never going to get divorced. No matter how bad things got, we would find a way to work through it. And I don't think that view is always there in cohabitation because you have the thought of, well, if it doesn't work out, we can just break up. And that is so detrimental if you do have kids with that person to the children. Statistics show us that children are also very likely to suffer in those cohabitation situations. And like Macy said, you have to process it as if you're going through a divorce, but you've never actually signed papers and you're not, there's no way to divide out the assets, so to speak, in a cohabitation experience, So I think that just having having gone into it, with the mindset of this, like if we're going to date to marry, you have to go very forward with the if we get married, we are not getting divorced. And, if there come to be hard times in dating, then, you can talk through those, or you can say, you know what, maybe we aren't a match. But when you enter into a cohabitating relationship, it is a lot harder to say, well, how do we divide the assets when we break up? If you buy a house together, who gets the house? If you are both on car loans, who gets the cars? It it's a lot messier. And I'm not saying divorce isn't messy, but when you go into it with clear boundaries and clear expectations of what the relationship is going to be, marriage makes a lot more sense in the context of life than cohabitation.
Yeah, marriage is much more life affirming. We know from statistics that you mentioned that children suffer, and yes, statistically, they are more likely to experience abuse in a cohabiting relationship where they're living with their biological mom and live-in boyfriend than they are with their own biological dad, right? Um, but we also know cohabitation harms men and women. It increases anxiety in men And it increases their likelihood of reacting to situations with physical anger, a physical outpouring of anger. We know for women, what it does is it decreases their ability to trust the next man who comes into her life. And if you cannot trust that individual, you cannot cling to him, it's very hard to be married to him lifelong. So you had some great statistics as well, Diana, with eliminating the possibility, or not eliminating, but making divorce much more likely. And then there's all those statistics about finances. So yeah, I too would encourage you to look at that cohabitation infographic and share it. But as far as your sisters are concerned, the original question, how do I address my sisters? Again, continuing to pray and continuing to encourage them to live according to uh, not only God's law, but also to desire to receive the gifts that God gives in marriage. And your very act of getting married and being a wife and a mom is going to be a confession to them, a confession that shows the good gifts that God gives in marriage. You said, Corey, that marriage wasn't like cohabitation and it affects children. And we know that it's not, even though the world tells us that it's the same thing, because we know that abortion increases in is more likely if you're cohabitating than if you are married, right? An unplanned pregnancy in marriage is often followed by a delivery of a healthy baby, right? Whereas an unplanned pregnancy, when you're cohabitating, um, is has a large percentage or large likelihood of ending in abortion, right? So lots of great life questions, lots of questions that we are happy to cover. And thanks so much to the youth who sent those questions in, especially those questions that were very vulnerable. I know your names weren't attached to them, but we certainly are praying for you and for the witness that you may share with others, that God would give you the words to say, and know that we will continue to be in prayer for you. To those who are listening, thanks for joining us. We hope that you join us next time on our next mailbag, and God's blessings on your week and your work for life. Thanks for joining us for today's life topic. Check out Y4Life.org or email Michelle at Y4Life.org to find out how and when you can go live with us at our next Chats for Life session. Or join us next time, right here at Y4Life Podcasts, where youth learn how to be gospel-motivated voices for life.